I formally open the meeting. Okay.
And everybody should know that you're being recorded. This was requested so that Pam and Kenny can be heard, and we can
Right.
post it on the website like we've
And I'll
done.
note that Pam McKinney is on the phone. She couldn't be here in person, so we're blessed to have her.
Pam, can you hear us okay?
Hi, Pam. We can't hear you. It's not loud though.
Louder and louder.
Yes, we are having way too much fun. Okay, talk one more time.
Hello there.
Hi.
Okay. So we're gonna have to be quiet so we can hear her. So we have some minutes to approve.
Just the full committee minutes. We still don't have a quorum of the architecture subcommittee, so we'll keep trying on that one. But if you look at the February 6th minutes, the joint meeting that we just had, if we could approve those. There's a couple minor edits from what I sent you by email, which are track changes. You'll see in the meeting minutes on the bottom of the first page, a small edit. And also, let me show you on page 5 of 6. What I wrote down in my notes just didn't make any sense. What I wrote down was the existing parking spaces may be reduced, which doesn't make any sense. The intent was the existing parking ratios may be reduced. So I clarified that.
So when everyone,
Move to approve.
all those in favor? Whoops. And I will abstain since I wasn't here. Laura will abstain also. So the next thing on our agenda is Pam McKinney and a review of financial feasibility for the project. And I'll note that Pam is just being engaged, so she hasn't done the work yet. So the focus of this discussion is making sure we're all on the same page as to the scope of what she's going to be doing. And in your packet, Kara handed out is a suggested scope of work, so we should take a look and make sure that that these are the questions we want Pam to examine, and are there any additional questions that we want her to examine. And as I understand it, what we're trying to do is the project has evolved over time since the last time Pam was here. And we want her to take one more look to validate what's some of the financial feasibility assumptions, give us some idea perhaps of areas we can push on, comment on some of the alternative scenarios, including viability of retail on Pleasant Street, which is one of the things the committee has heard, or we have heard from committee members, and I'm sure committee members have heard from members of the public. Look at some of the parking ratios, and whatever else is on here.
So can I jump in for a second?
Please do, save me.
I want to flag for everybody, Pam has been given a heads up about this, but we want to make sure that Pam takes a look at all, since the hotel study was done, other hotels that have come online in the area that could affect the feasibility of a hotel at this site. And in bright letters right now, I'm flagging to you the first page, 30 Webster, which was the assisted living building on Webster Street, and then it was rented by the schools for a couple of years. There is a proposal, but not a full permit package submitted yet, but a proposal by the current owner to convert that use to hotel. This would be an independent hotel, I think 120 units or so, not adding parking. So that's basically all I know. There's gonna be lots of things that continue to change. It's, it's Coolidge Corner, but I wanted you to know as soon as I knew that that's something that's being batted about as an additional, program in Coolidge Corner.
And what other hotels are, excuse me, are on the list? The Holiday Inn expansion, I assume,
Yeah.
and, sorry.
Pam, do you want to talk about how far afield you look at when you look at hotels coming online?
Sure. This first question is essentially, I think it's important for us to update our understanding of what's being proposed since we looked at this last. And I guess I would say the 2 or 3 things that I think we want to just think about and make sure that we are confident that there aren't going to be negative impacts on hotel have to do with this little 30 Webster Street thing, which I will say just off the cuff, without knowing much more about it than the fact that it is unbranded, it's likely to be, how shall I say, not not a modern new hotel product. I'm not especially concerned about that one, but there are other things that are happening in the hotel market that I think we just want to do a check-in on, and the more important ones include the proposed expansion at 1200 Beacon. As I understand it, that project has morphed away from the original sort of condo schemes that were talked about a while back to something that is more like a bona fide hotel repositioning and expansion. And of course, there are also additional hotels being proposed in Kenmore, which again isn't directly competitive in the sense of their location, but I think given the demand generators that will be relied upon at 10 Waldo, we want to understand what Mark Development, their latest tower proposal. You may have seen the renderings of what they are now suggesting will be done in Kenmore Square. It's no longer just a repositioning of the Buckminster with a little thing across the street. It's a big old tower hotel, which I think, again, I'm not especially concerned about the impact that the existing pipeline, the new additions to the pipeline are going to have, but I think we want to be able to have a crisp answer to the question that's no doubt going to come, and that means doing a little bit of investigation on that front to bring us up to speed. And so, Karen, do you want me to just try to walk through this little scope? Is that helpful? I don't know to what extent folks have had a chance
by all
to
means.
read it. But
We're just reading it
Yeah,
now.
we just got it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, so I mean, what I might do is just take the opportunity, to walk along with you and just talk a little bit about what we are trying to accomplish in each of these things, and to make additions or subtractions as the committee thinks this is appropriate. There are these sort of 3 issues at the front end called addressing the global issues, and there's one of these is just updating our understanding of hotel, which I've just talked about. The other is, as I understand it, there's some desire to roll the clock back a little bit just to make sure that everybody understands what the incremental effect of the 2 levers that were pulled by the proponent here in the last proposal, meaning their agreement to downsize the unit sizing and to include an in lieu payment for some number of on-site units. I think as I understand it, as that older proposal went from 14 to 13, the Zucker rationale for reducing the size of the Resi building included both of those two adjustments, smaller sizing and this in-lieu payment. And as I understand, there's some desire to know sort of with what do each of those things contribute, not just what do they contribute, or did they contribute in the aggregate. So we're going to at least provide a little bit of background on that. There's also, I think, a desire to, now with the latest shift in the program to include this ground floor cafe, to get some reading on, you know, what the nature of the retail opportunity is at this location. Is the cafe, as they propose, sort of the right size? Is it a good location for retail? What do we think about the opportunity for retail here? And again, even without doing much analytics, I guess I would just offer that it's my view, at least, that this is not a great retail location. It's certainly not as good as being closer to or on Harvard Street. And I think the more distant you are from the core intersection and Harvard Street proper, the more reliant you become on the above ground users to help you sustain and the immediate abutters to help you sustain a viable business model for whatever retail might go in the ground floor. So I must say I'm not troubled, I guess is the best word, by the fact that the ground floor retail is relatively small. We would not, I think, want to see a lot of retail in that ground floor. Certainly not sitting empty or underperforming, which is certainly a possibility if there were to be a real emphasis on ground floor retail in that location. But I'd like to be able to come back to you at some point with a somewhat more definitive or empirically based opinion about that, rather than my sort of reaction to it off the cuff. But apart from these sort of overarching or generally helpful opinions, the core of this proposal has to do with reviewing the current proposal. And I think rather than simply say, oh yeah, we're going to review the proposal, it's helpful to try to articulate specifically what sorts of things we want to be able to make a comment about. And those include, of course, responding to the change in program to now include a co-working space and this cafe, to include an evaluation again of the incremental effect of energy efficiency targets, which I understand Chestnut Hill is working to provide some background information about, to respond to the sort of immediate request for mitigation having to do with open space largely. You know, what is the cost of that? How does that affect viability of the project overall, including the streetscape improvements, irrigation and landscape improvements to the library, and landscaping of the paid parking areas there on the corner of John and Green Street. Again, it's not a lot of square footage, but understanding the effects is, I think, an important thing for us to be able to comment about. And then on the revenue side, we want to make sure that we're understanding whether how the developer is treating and what their attitude is about the revenues being generated by function rooms, by restaurants, by the parking being offered to condo owners next door, by the opportunity perhaps for offering daytime commercial parking to folks in the neighborhood. And there's some specific assumptions that I think we'll be trying to incorporate there, meaning that the overnight rates and daytime permit holder rates would want to be consistent with public rates. And as I understand it, you're talking, and Kara, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been talking about splitting that revenue 50-50. So whatever income comes from those won't go directly in its entirety to the project. It will be divided between the town and Chestnut Hill.
Yeah, let me adjust that statement. So for everybody's context here, when the Marriott Courtyard parking happened, part of that zoning and agreement was that the parking that was on that lot be replaced and built by the developer underground, and that the parking revenue, that a certain number of spaces be offered at the same rate as what the parking rate was at that point in time during the daytime, and that any revenues be split 50-50 between the town and the developer. That property is also still owned by the town. It's a lease, and the other revenue that we get from it is more or less than property taxes, as I understand it. Pam, I think what I have heard from Chestnut Hill Realty on this, and these are just moving parts all at the same time, is a preference to not have the parking revenue split annually from the town and Chestnut Hill. From the town and Chestnut Hill moving forward. For purposes of your study, I feel like I'm speaking for myself, I'm agnostic on which side of the ledger that goes on, as long as it's being modeled. So the parking that's on the corner of John and Green currently, the town gets some parking revenue for those spaces. We also subsidize parking everywhere it exists in Coolidge Corner. The parking rates that we charge are below what it costs the town to upkeep, maintain them. It's a public good. It costs the town money to provide parking spaces.
Yep.
So I want to test this with you guys. What I'd like to do is have you model Chestnut Hill picking up the entire bill for turning that parking lot into park space, which would be the entire capital cost of not just the park area, but also providing the parking spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that those parking spaces are offered at a level that's equivalent to whatever the public parking rate is. And then after that, not be tied down by bookkeeping moving forward. That's my suggestion.
Understood.
Linda?
Yeah, so a couple questions there. One is about the park. Is it going to be then deeded over to the town and the town does all the maintenance? Or is Chestnut Hill going to do the maintenance?
It is currently owned and will be owned by the town.
Okay.
The preference with the parks director is for the maintenance for the maintenance of that park to be by the town.
Uh-huh.
We've had other cases where there's been a shared maintenance agreement and it's
Doesn't
been
work out.
disappointing.
Right.
It's easier to account for that in the beginning and know that that's a built-in cost for the town every time you get additional park space.
Right, so I would say that is a cost to the town. Then the other thing is that we had talked about Chestnut Hill charging for parking for the people that live there. Not just the people from outside who are renting spaces in the garage, but people who live there also paying for the parking, which is decoupling the parking from the rent, so that if you don't have a car, you're not paying for it.
Yes, and I'll just say that is the normative approach
Okay,
in the market today.
yeah, so,
Just because of the nature of parking utilization, it's fluctuating and changing, and both from a consumer point of view, you don't want to be tied to renting a space that you don't need. But I guess I would offer as well that in the future, should there be less need as time goes by. Lord knows what we'll be thinking about cars 30 years from now. Being able to extract the value or utilization of those spaces for the benefit of others beyond the project might be a part of a longer term strategy.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi Pam, this is Ken. I have a couple of comments. Under 1.1, the update on hotel demand, I think if memory serves, the Pinnacle Advisory and the HBS market studies incorporated an assumption about the Holiday Inn, but they did not have the Kenmore Square projects in there. And then they obviously didn't have yet the 30 Webster. So my concern is less about overall financial feasibility than the implication it might have on tax revenue, because that's a big selling point. That will be a big selling point, I think, for this project, the mixed-use project over the 40B. And where there are some assumptions, obviously this assumptions-driven exercise for estimating the town's occupancy excise tax. So as part of that, if you could, as part of your analysis on taking just an updated look at the hotel, I think that would be an important part of that, because I think that's going to be a question that's going to come up at town meeting.
Yeah, and my approach to trying to understand that is it's not just a matter of is there enough demand to fill the rooms at a reasonable level. I think we want to try to at least dig down a little bit to address the question of performance, so that we understand whether or not the effects here are going to impact on revenue, overall revenue, because of course that's going to link directly to the ability of a hotel at Waldo to support a real estate tax payment.
And I had just a second comment on 2.1. The cafe open to the public and residential building. I don't, well, I'll speak for myself. I don't think people on the committee are ignorant about the fact that this is this is an inferior location compared to Harvard and Beacon. That's very obvious to all of us. What we did see is plans that are dated, say, a set of plans I'm looking at on October 24th, 2018 by Chestnut Hill Realty, showing 6,310 square feet of amenity space on the Pleasant Street side of the residential building. And so a lot of us were saying, well, couldn't you do space that's partially open to the public? And because this amenity space is presumably not in and of itself revenue producing or significantly revenue producing, and yet some kind of internet cafe space that's open to the public that could also be beneficial to the residents. I assume the residents of 143 units like coffee and pastries. Let's see if there can be a win-win situation here, not expecting this to be a big revenue producer, but even if an operator could cover, taxes and part of the common area maintenance costs or something like that, that Chestnut Hill's pro forma is no worse off, and it's a nice amenity to the public, and it's a selling point, frankly, I think, with the neighborhood.
Right, and you'll see later on the next page that I've got another little bullet point that speaks to the amenity space, because it does. I know that there have been questions about how much space is really needed, and how will or if the amenity space contribute to income for the project. But I think, Ken, what I'm hearing you say is it's not just about income; it's about potentially having access for others beyond the upstairs residents.
Right,
Yes.
and you would have run a set of numbers, presumably, or reviewed Chestnut Hill's numbers that showed this space is not producing any revenue. So the idea that we're not saying we're banking on it being, you know, $30 net space or anything like that, $30 a square foot net or whatever the number might, you know, might be in some other hypothetical model in space. But it's just more of like, can the amenity be a win-win for the community and the
Yeah,
residents?
understood, I get it. So I'll add that as an additional sort of question to put under item G.
Great.
Because I understand there's a distinction here between access and income.
Right, and I think the overarching question is, what can we do to enliven the sidewalk and
Right.
make it a activate the sidewalk, right? That's a better way to put it.
Right, understood.
I don't know if people have looked at the plans for the Holiday Inn and what they're proposing there. But this is starting to sound a little bit like that because they do have a little corner cafe, very small, that leads out into an open area next to the sidewalk, elevated. They've landscaped the corner there, and then it's right there on the corner on Beacon Street. And I believe when we looked at the plans, it looked much more like and this is in front of the planning board, kind of a hipster place. I mean, there's a lot of rooms that I don't think people of visiting here as parents or of a little money would want to stay in, only because they're developing them on the inside so that you're basically looking out on little community, common areas rather, with not a direct access to the outside. I mean, a window.
Right.
So it's a different concept. The decoration looks different. It's, you know, it's I get the feeling it's appealing to maybe visitors from you, or I'm not sure, but it's not the kind of branding that I'm not sure we have to be worried about necessarily.
How many more rooms are they adding, do we know?
I don't have that.
35 or something.
38.
Okay.
And I'll point out that when Pam last looked at the hotel market analysis, the Holiday Inn was proposing, I think, a couple hundred rooms. Furthermore, the 30 Webster project, we believe is going to be geared towards the extended stay market, so that's a different slice, obviously, than what we believe the Waterbury Hotel will be doing.
Okay. Roger.
Hi Pam, it's Roger.
Okay.
It's Roger. On 2.5, you've got A, B, and C there, the three things that you're looking at. One, I have a question about B. The other two are comparing with a 40B return, and the other one being the hotel. But just a quick question on B. It asks what would the alternative viability if the project were built as a condo development. I remember asking this question for the Holiday Inn because for when they were planning housing there, because the developer was looking at both at different points, I believe. But why would we want to spend any time at all asking this question in this situation when this developer, Winchester Hill Realty, isn't proposing that, and furthermore, it's not part of their business model, and I don't think they've ever done any condos in any of their other properties.
We have done some condos, but we're not doing them here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
why are we interested in that?
Karen, that may be better a question for you.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's something that I put on the list because I wanted to figure out how to answer that question if it's at town meeting, right? So zoning doesn't say whether something's an apartment or ownership. So let's imagine the building's built. There's been no indications that this is going to be a condo development here by Chestnut Hill Realty. However, we've spent 2 years talking about the needed height of this residential building because of project costs, dependent on a certain amount of parking. And then, so, you know, what is the response? I'm looking for as many stones to understand. Even if it means that, yes, that would be, you know, a higher profit to the developer and he's not planning on doing it. Whatever the answer is, I think it's important for us to be honest about it and know what that is ahead of time.
So it doesn't have a downside that if it turned out that was more attractive financially, it would raise a question that the answer would be, they just don't want to do it?
It might be, or I just think that Pam needs to tell us,
Yeah.
we need to know what the analysis is, and then we can.
I mean, I can certainly give you an understanding of what that alternative means from a viability point of view. But of course, Roger, as you're pointing out, it may not matter because we know that the developer here has no intention of doing that. And frankly, I think the alternative from his perspective, if that is, if that's what folks might, if that's what you would insist upon, then you're headed for 40B. Because I just think that there's really no chance that that this owner will follow that path. Now, Lord knows, 20 years from now, there could be a conversion opportunity, I suppose. But that is, I think as a matter of viability for the initial construction, I'm not sure it's, as a practical matter, that interesting. Although, Kara, to your point, I think somebody's going to ask that question.
I think we're gonna wanna know too, the impact on the town's tax revenue from the project, if it were kind of implemented, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question in the sense that that programmatic shift results in a bunch of changes to the program. It isn't just a matter of swapping in a different kind of revenue stream for a rental revenue stream. It will require a different program, probably the square footages and the unit map typing and the mix and all of that is likely to change if it's a condo. The costs will be higher if it's a condo. The parking requirements will be higher if it's a condo. So it's not all on the upside. But maybe that's the point that needs to be demonstrated to folks who would sort of reflexively say, well, why aren't they doing condos? This is just an economic matter.
Well, I think, this is Susie, Pam. I think too, though, people will be interested to know if the project could be smaller with the developer still making, the kind of money that he's going to be making with a non-condo project. I think people will definitely want that information.
Yeah, except that if this owner would never do it, then I guess it's not entirely clear to me that you don't just end up in a 40B conversation at that point.
But it's up to town meeting to make that decision, to vote on it, and I think when people would like information, then that's important. And the other thing I would say is never say never. Depends on, lots of circumstances that could develop, so.
Okay.
Going to bullet point 3.
Oh, wait, really? Just missed all this other stuff. We didn't, Roger skipped ahead. Yeah, Roger skipped ahead, so we didn't really go through these other things. I don't know
Okay.
if the plan is to go through everything, but,
Do we have to?
I don't know, let's see.
Well, I think, what is it? 2.04C. I mean, do we want to talk more about
Well, we modified the assumption at the end. We talked about it. It's just, it's a, scenario that Pam will look at.
Yeah, so in 3, I guess we're just after some understanding of what alternatives could look like. In some ways, this condo idea kind of falls more in this category than in the other. But if we were to assume a different approach to affordability, what would the impact be? I guess that's really the point of 3.1. And then, secondly, I think there are sort of two variations on that theme. 20% still, but at a higher level, or I should say lower AMI. Alternatively, a higher percentage of units, but at the 80% AMI. So those are two variations. And again, I'm obviously open to a different viewpoint on what should be tested, but affordability in general. And then in 3.2, trying to understand sort of in a sort of a back-solving sort of way, what happens if or can we reduce parking ratios so as to eliminate the drag on the pro forma that's being created by having to construct multiple levels of parking, or 1.5 levels rather than one. And can a reduction, should we believe that there's still viability with a reduction in the ratios, can that reduction enable a smaller project? If we hold the hotel at its current rate or current size, would a parking reduction enable a smaller residential development to occur?
Yeah. I have a couple questions, Pam. This is Linda. So back to the affordability question, could somebody remind me, if we get the 20% at 50, does that mean all the units count?
Yes, on the state house
Yes.
inventory.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's the beauty, I guess, of a rental proposal here, is that all these units, even the market rate ones, would count
Yeah.
towards your 10%.
That'd be great. I think a lot of people would think that was really great. So, then on the parking ratios, didn't I hear Alan tell me that the River Road was 0.175 or something?
Wasn't that?
No.
It's 0.25 now?
0.27.
So that's what it ended up getting built as? Yeah, okay. And then this one here is 0.2, and then one in South Boston is 0, and so, I don't know. And then on the residential, I don't know how many scenarios you want to run, but to me, 0.5 is not unreasonable, so.
Yeah, I think it comes down to how you view the demography of the residential unit occupants. If this were strictly a millennial project, you would say, hey, 0.5, let's not even debate it. But I think if you view this as being, at least in part, targeted to satisfy an existing Brookline empty nester market, folks downsizing out of all those larger houses all around Coolidge Corner, then that 0.5 ratio isn't going to cut it. That's for sure.
I'll just say that I know for a
those
fact.
households are going to have, an average, maybe even above a 1. So I think that the question is on a blended basis, understanding that a project in this location is going to be neither strictly a senior empty nester project nor strictly a millennial project. What's the blend look like under different assumptions, and how tightly do you want to ratchet down the ratios, with the worry that I suppose if you ratchet them down too far, you may price that empty nester market out, or you may create a situation where it's more difficult to accommodate that user. And so, I guess that's sort of how I think about how we would establish an understanding of what the appropriate metric is.
Right.
Again, this isn't like being in Kendall Square. This isn't like being even in Seaport, or in the financial district in Boston, where proximity to transit, multimodal, lots of, largely younger households allows you to contemplate resi ratios that are 5 or sub 5 even,
Well, I mean, in terms of existing rental housing.
0.3, in Seaport.
Right, so, but in terms of it's being rental, that has a whole different meaning in terms of the parking than it does with it being ownership opportunity. So, just if you look.
You still have cars, I guess that's the point.
But there's far fewer of them for the renters that live in Brookline. There just are. If you look at all around the whole community,
Well, it's not just
much,
Brookline
much
either.
less.
I mean, it's a national trend that people are driving less, people are getting fewer, young kids are not getting their driver's licenses. It's a trend, it's a national trend, so.
And we have like
I
severe
agree
congestion
with that.
there.
I guess I'm
It's
just
true.
observing that attitudes about cars and whether you need them and whether you drive them and whether you need a place to store one even if you don't drive
Or
it.
if we're gonna allow them.
Every day, all those
Exactly.
things, hit the demographic categories a little bit differently depending on where you are. Which category you're talking about. And, I've sometimes used, my dad who lives in Coolidge Corner as an example. He doesn't have a car. So, but, he's also 88. But I'm not so sure that, he hasn't had a car for 20 years, so maybe he's an anomaly. But I think if you believe that there's an active adult category here where people have a car, they're not going to get rid of a car, they need it even if they don't drive it to commute. If they need it just for, trips on the weekends or doing grocery shopping, trust me, they're going to have a car. And it's going to be a much more prevalent pattern with that older cohort than it is for the younger folks who aren't really, frankly, that interested even in having a car. So the point being, I think you have to think about it in a more nuanced way than simply saying, hey, it's a 0.5, don't worry. I think you have to think about, if it's half of it is older and half of it is millennial, and we feel comfortable with the ratio for millennials at X, but the older group needs a different ratio. What's that blend look like, and how do we come up with a ratio that is, derivative of some thinking about who you think the target population is for the project.
So Pam, it's Susie. I'm just breaking in to sort of ask a follow-up question from Linda. I mean, is it difficult to do alternative analyses, I guess, one, I think all of us appreciate your sort of approach to use the parking ratios blended based on most likely, a blended residential population there. But I guess the question is it so much harder to do both? Like, could you do the 0.5 parking
Well, we
ratio?
can certainly compute what the effect is if you ratchet it down
Yes.
to something lower versus something higher. I guess I would just caution that just because you model it doesn't make it so. Doesn't mean that it's going to work. And so I guess I'm always a little worried that if we just say, hey, let's test it at, at a 0.5 or something really at the extreme end of the spectrum, that you may give people courage to thinking that works, when in fact it may not. And so I think we just want to be mindful of modeling things that are workable, doable, financeable, marketable, and not just pick something out of the air because we like the number to be nice and low.
So I would say that if you were to come to town meeting, that there is a very large, I would say, number of people who are very interested in lower parking ratios in Brookline, who are very interested in bicycle, who are there. It's, you know, we're dealing with 240 people to vote on a 2/3 basis, and so we have to be aware of, you know, sort of competing alternatives. These things will definitely get asked about, and I don't think we want to be blindsided by these kinds of questions. I think we should be prepared for it. So if you're saying that 0.5 won't work for one reason or another, let's do the modeling and we can prepare some sort of an explanation about how this might be unrealistic and why. So I think that's something we need to think about.
Well, it's sort of the same issue on the condo front, isn't it? I mean, it's a similar situation. You know, we may have a point of view about whether as a practical matter it's workable, but that doesn't mean you can't test it and then have an explanation to go with it, as you know, as to why it may or may not be the right thing to do. It also seems to me that that you know, with respect to parking in particular, more so than condo, you know, there's an arc to how parking is likely to evolve over time, which is different than condo. You know, if we have a developer who just isn't going to do condo, well, then that's something. But you know, if you have an environment in which you can see change, then that simply is another dimension, if you will, in the analytics that you know is worth sort of talking about and thinking about. You know, what may be needed to get it off the ground. In other words, today may not be what is needed in the future, and how you accommodate that change is, you know, is its own set of questions. You know, apart from, you know, if we build fewer, can the resi buildings be smaller?
Maura?
This is Maura. I have a question, Pam. I wonder if there's been any comparison, I don't know if it's in your interest, with Dexter Park, which is on the opposite end of, not too far from where this proposed building is. That's a big, huge rental property with a lot of parking, and that's been an issue for many reasons within the community for years. There's a lot of parking there. Those are, you know, it's a straight rental building. And I don't know what the parking ratio is and when it was built, but I do know I live right across the street from that building and they can't fill those spots. So I know that the parking trends right on the other end, not too far, have really changed. So I'm wondering what, you know, the proposed changes could be, or you know, what you are doing today and then in the future. I mean, I think that when Dexter Park was built and what has happened now are two very different things, and that parking lot is up. I'm not done, Pam.
I don't know off the top of my head what their actual utilization is, but my strong suspicion is that they have well over 1.0.
No, they don't.
You know, generally speaking, projects that were built in that era.
That's a knowable fact.
Were built in 1.5
considerable.
So, but the
or more.
Wait, it's like 0.7.
You know, and today, of course, those ratios, you know, no one would build to those standards today. And, you know, unless you're crazy and you live in Newton, you still think 1.5 is what you have to have. So,
Pam, Maura.
I think you raise an interesting question. There is this issue of
we can find out
capacity in some projects today, and it's legitimate to wonder whether that's a function of there having too many in the first instance, or whether it's a function of there actually being less than the sort of demand that we're talking about.
Pam, hold on just a second, Maura wanted to finish her question to you.
Sure.
Right, so I don't know if that's a possibility for us to have some kind of comparison. I think that would be something would, at least to me, would be important because they're on the up, it's a very close project. They both generate a lot of vehicles, both of those projects will, so I'd be really interested to know what the comparison is, and maybe we could help you out with that and see how the trends have changed over the year with that project too, so.
And also the demographics of the
Well,
residents may be different.
they've really evolved. I mean, it was families, it was
Now it's a lot of
students, so I
students.
don't know that even the Waldo Durgan, what is proposed there, I mean, you can't, who knows who's gonna move in there? We can say millennials and a mix, nobody really knows. And things can change too, so.
We're not gonna settle the parking
Right.
issues tonight. We're just establishing what Pam was going to model for us. So I'd just like to finish the list.
If there were a desire to add some comparative parking comps, if you will, from Brookline, what's the ratio? What's the utilization rate? I mean, whether we can get all that, get all the managers to tell us everything we might like to know is always a question, but doing some spot fact checking, we'll just call it, for Brookline parking rates, ratios and utilization rates, that could be a way of helping to defend a point of view, frankly, about these ratios.
Yeah, I can, Pam, our regional planning agency is, I think, wrapping up a study in Brookline and many other communities that actually updates the work that the parking committee did 10 years ago, Linda.
Mhm.
I think you were on that committee.
Yes, I was.
So I think we will be able to get you some data that it's, from property managers, fact check, that will be helpful. Let me see if I can find that from them.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I have lots of, we call them parking comps, related to what developers are building today, and what lenders are underwriting to today.
Yeah.
But to know how utilization is actually working in Brookline would be a very useful thing.
Great.
Are there any things beyond this list that we want to ask Pam? And then I'd like to open the floor up to Mr. Lashinsky, who would like to address some of the issues from the surrounding merchants' point of view. If Ms. Cates wants to say anything, give her that opportunity. So, Mr. Lashinsky.
Thank you. Pam, you can't see me. I'm David Lashinsky, owner and operator of Eureka Puzzles. I'm a town resident. I'm also chair of the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association. And I can tell you that one of the things that we are constantly dealing with is a lack of parking for our customers. And the fact that most of our customers come from out of the area. They don't actually reside in Brookline. They don't walk to our stores. They don't live within easy commercial access. We're a destination location. People come here from the outside. So when I hear of a major residential building being considered with a small parking for a potential future in which few people have cars, that strikes fear in my heart. And the issue is that right now, we're in a position where we really need to remain, for us to remain viable, for us to remain vital and a place that's a destination location, we need to have a place so that when people come here, they can in fact put their car somewhere. If we wind up creating residential structures with inadequate parking, then the available parking stock gets consumed by everyone who lives here or everyone who works here, and there's no room for anyone else. So something that is a very important consideration for everyone is that we think not simply about, oh, this one residential building, but also to think about what's the commercial life that's here. I think everyone is very well aware of the move for the theater to add a third expansion, which will become essentially raise the awareness of Coolidge Corner as a theatrical district to a world-class theater, which currently they've been lacking, although Kathy's done a phenomenal job of bringing people in. That's going to attract more people. For us to be able to support those people, we need to have a place for those cars to be somewhere. Currently, we need to think about where do all the employees park? Now, clearly many of them get here by public transportation, but many more don't. It's one of the whole reason for a push for employee parking. One of the sad facts of life right now is that Brookline as a whole is priced out almost all of the employees who work here. You know, when I first started Eureka, I had people that lived above me in the building. They no longer do that. They can't afford it. They live now 5 miles away, someplace over in Brighton or in Somerville, because they can no longer afford to be within walking distance of the store. It's just a fact of the costs of what it takes to live here. They have to get here somehow. Some of them clearly take the T, some of them take public transportation, some bike, some drive. So again, we have to, you know, my point is that we have to think about that demographic. I just want to tell you that I recognize how hard it is to pick a moving target. Because we're talking about a building and thinking about parking structures, right, or putting adequate parking in to keep the commercial areas alive today. And we're also saying, well, you know, we may not need so many cars in the future. We don't know. So I have a thought, which is something that you may want to, I don't know if it's ever been considered before, but that is, has anybody thought about these structures with convertible parking? In other words, is there a way to say, I'm going to build something today that has a certain parking ratio, but then if there are not as many cars around, I can take some of those spots and turn them into storage units. I can tell you, when I look around today, one of the most prevalent ads I see is for storage units, because everyone's houses are too small. You've got no place to put the stuff that you've got. You have to move it out of the house. If you don't have a car, isn't there a better way of, why don't we just go ahead and take that space and enclose it? And now all of a sudden I've got a huge place to put my stuff. So what would be interesting, and I don't know if this was already discussed, I apologize because I wasn't part of these meetings, but if not, everyone's thought about it from a modeling perspective to say, hey, so for the next 10 to 15 years, we know we have, vehicles of one sort or another. And by the way, they are also going to become electrified and smaller, but there will be vehicles. In 30 years, who knows? What about if there's a way of converting some of these parking spaces to storage units? Simply, inexpensively, all of a sudden everyone can make use of that space, and so it no longer becomes wasted space.
Sure. Well, and I'll just say that is in fact what developers are doing today, is they're planning for the current environment and with an expectation that you've got convertible or adaptive reuse potential for parking levels in the future. And Kara, remind me, am I remembering this correctly? Is the current garage being planned in such a way that it's is relatively level?
Yes, I'm laughing because David and I go and have coffee often, but we have not talked about this project in maybe 6 months.
At least.
So I'm not surprised that this idea is coming from two directions, but to be clear, the current zoning does allow for a modification of the special permit after everything's built for parking to be converted to habitable or finished space, as long as the trips don't increase from what the original special permit was, the vehicle trips. I'm picking up though on something David's talked about and that I've heard from other Coolidge Corner merchants. I'm wondering if it would So lowering the parking is, a goal for the whole district. The impacts of how fast that change happens through regulation will impact some types of businesses differently than other types of businesses. So for example, a CVS, we know from doing customer surveys that a majority of their customers are more likely to be, walking distance or coming back from commuting walk-by trips. Whereas a store that sells handmade jewelry, with a price point of $100 or $200 per purchase per customer, we also know that for that individual store, their customers tend to be more on the out of town or relying on customers outside of Brookline more. And so I'm wondering if the committee wants to think about some, and I don't know what this is yet, but some, not for Pam to model, but just as far as our zoning goes or developers agreement goes, should there be some intermediate step before parking is allowed to be converted to additional finished space for the project? Should it go, and I'm just brainstorming out loud here, should it first go to, the transportation board to see what the occupancy parking rate is in Coolidge Corner? In other words, should those spaces, if they're no longer needed for the project, should we see if we could replace additional public parking underground and then free up more surface parking in the long run?
Definitely. Having a way to satisfy the needs of the customers that we have is something that I think is a long-term issue, which means people are always going to have to get here from somewhere else. And so I would only advocate for any sort of a large-scale conversion when in fact we know that the demand has been fully met. And I agree with your observation completely. There are different stores. And if in fact we're saying that, gee, we can accomplish where many people shop at stores without cars, I would agree completely that, well, it depends on the stores. And if we want to have a district in which we simply have convenience stores, or exercise gyms, then the implication is you don't need that much parking. But if we want a district that has things that are much more interesting, that will attract people in from a larger area, that will really be able to fully make use of the exciting offerings that are here, and we have to think about providing the infrastructure to make that viable.
But the problem is too, there's no place, at least the trend seems to be, there's a lot of stores in Coolidge Corner that are closing. There's so many empty storefronts, so it's almost like you need the retail storefronts in order to have the customers also.
That's actually,
so,
and I
trying
gotta
to
tell
look
you,
at this whole trend, it's a whole nother thing that's kind of complicated. The matter is that, sure, we want to make these local businesses viable, but at the rate, a lot of these places are going, they're closing down every other day.
So what I'm hearing from you is that in fact you're looking at a complicated picture. Stores are closing down as well, which therefore is freeing up demand for parking. And
we don't know what's happening. It seems like it's a very
and what I would say, and I look at that as well. It's one of the things that I'm very aware of. But I'm also aware of a lot of the driving forces that are causing a decrease in pedestrian traffic, which in effect puts more pressure on the bottom line, and so therefore the stores after a while aren't able to make it. So if we take a step back 2 or 3 years ago, when we saw, well, that's further ago, there's Amazon, right? More recently, there have been all of the construction issues going on with the new school here in Coolidge Corner, with the KI project, with moving the teachers into the commercial spaces, with the lack of available spaces for customers to come in. Now, with going back even a little further, with the major construction projects that went through Beacon Street, all of which disrupted the normal traffic and flow and parking availability. what happens is as you get these disruptions, people change their habits. They change their habits, then they'll go somewhere else. Now, when I sign a lease is 5 years or 10 years or 20 years long, what I may wind up seeing is that, okay, I've got a lease, I'm locked in. So if all of a sudden I start losing my customers this year and next year and the year after, I don't have any money to renew the lease, at which point I go out. Now, when somebody else wants to come in, they look around and they say, oh gee, there's no parking, and they make other decisions. So the kinds of activities and events that are going on have a definite implication in the near term and in the middle term. What we're seeing right now in Coolidge Corner is a lot of things that have been happening that are, the middle term impact of not having parking for the past 3 years. In addition to the long-term impact of a shift to Amazon, or a shift to more online. Now, at the same time that that's going on, there's also been a recognition that shopping is entertainment, that shopping is actually part of an evening out, and then you start looking at saying, okay, how does Coolidge Corner rank? And actually, Coolidge Corner ranks pretty well as having the infrastructure, the potential to go ahead and buck the overall trend. And what I'm trying to do is make sure that we are able to keep that potential alive and make it real. So if we have the Coolidge Corner Theater adds another, an additional theater, it increases the demand for people coming into this area. If we could bring other live theatrical venues or get one into this area, it increases demand. We have more restaurants, it increases, the foot traffic, people come here. If there's more people coming here, it supports more retail. And therefore, the people that are interested in opening shops and are managing them have an easier time making a living. So it's all combined together and it's really complicated. I agree. It's almost like looking at a crystal ball. Fortunately, we have a good planner over here.
I have Beth Case. I have a couple of things to ask questions. One of the things that what you were saying brings to mind is Bow Market in Somerville, and generating a destination space which is has arts and restaurants and small businesses, local businesses that reflect the local nature and flavor. But that was a real concerted effort of planning and developers. And, it would be something that we could look at here in Brookline Village and in Coolidge Corner to cultivate that kind of energy. The other thing that, looking at the financials, and it looks like this is what all of these points are driving at. I think as a town meeting member, there will have to be very clear numbers as to what the revenues for the town will be in different scenarios. Whether it's a 40B versus a hotel at full occupancy, a hotel at partial occupancy. I don't think any town meeting member knows what that tax is going to translate to into numbers. Same thing with 40B rental units versus market rate rental units versus rental units with. Do we know what the contribution to the affordable housing fund is going to be?
Yep, we know that.
And how many units are still going to be affordable in this building?
11-ish.
Plus, there's a $3.25 million payment that the developer's making to
Right.
the trust fund.
And how many affordable units are we losing?
10.
So,
I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as losing because the way that the money is going to be paid to the HAB will actually result in probably fourfold, possibly as many as 40 units that we'll be able to use with that money.
Well, I mean,
So-
maybe they should contribute, I don't know how much money it is per unit, but maybe it should be more. I think that there's a way for the town to sort of figure that out,
But I think
Right.
Beth's point is that while Pam's doing the work about the project feasibility, the committee needs to go back and refresh the potential revenues to the town, which we've done, but we just
Right.
need to pull together again.
Because, I mean, as we know from Hancock Village, town meeting will look at this really seriously as far as weighing out what our affordable housing gains are versus, you know, all of these things. And if they don't feel like it's good enough, it will not pass. So I think you need to be
I
real
don't think you
specific.
can. Hancock Village was a completely different scenario.
Well, I mean, it's, you're asking for a zoning change in lieu of 40B. So it's not, I mean, in concept, it's not different.
Town meeting ignored a, over $100 million fiscal impact. So town meeting doesn't always,
Well, there's impacts to this project that are different from Hancock Village.
yeah.
And there may be fiscal impacts that we're not really
And
seeing in terms of
Your point's
congestion.
well taken. We've talked about this a lot as a
Yeah,
committee.
no, I know
And
you-
Roger is the chairman of the HAB, and some of us went to the HAB and talked about the payment. And so this has been vetted, and it needs to be explained at town meeting. You're absolutely
Yeah.
right.
Paul?
I want to go back to parking. And first, compliment the committee for voting no parking minimums at the last meeting. That sets up the things that I've been hearing discussed tonight, which is whatever the initial parking is here, sort of morphing over time. I understand that the developer will include in the memorandum of agreement language relative to mutual cooperation around the eventuality of there being excess parking at this property for internal uses as the parking paradigm changes over time. Similar to what Kara referenced. I thought it was really interesting that David talked even further forward about using that space for alternative uses, which of course the committee has already looked at in the first draft of zoning. I do want to remind the committee that, and I did mention this when I last spoke to you at your December meeting, that with respect to parking, the entire underwriting, as Pam is going to be re-looking at, of the size of these buildings is predicated in large part on the amount and the location of the parking. And therefore, in my opinion, there needs to be an overarching structure that ensures that the developer, if given the opportunity to build whatever FAR and height the committee recommends and town meeting potentially votes, to ensure that the parking that was required in the first place, or was used to justify the FAR actually gets built. So that's something that we need a little more discussion and work on.
Okay. Anything, do we need to cover anything else tonight? So, when's our next meeting?
Our next meeting is on the 28th, it's on your agenda, handwritten, February 28th and then March 6th. The only other side note I have is, well, we can do a lot of this by email, but I will be asking you guys to approve several minutes that just were never approved. I went ahead and posted them as draft to keep the community updated, but this is from like 2 months ago, so I apologize, but we need to do some administrative work. I'll send a separate email about that, but I just wanted you to know that that was coming.
So is the February 28th meeting to discuss results of Pam's analyses? Is that what's
Pam, the next, I know you're traveling a lot in February. I think we were talking about getting something back to the committee so that you would come back on March 6th, is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's the soonest, you know, if I'm getting started in earnest, you know, essentially, you know, tonight at midnight. The March 6th date is the soonest I can actually have something together to talk about.
So that, I haven't talked about this with Neil yet, but the meeting on the 28th, there's been conversation about the need to look at the design guidelines one more time before it goes to the planning board for adoption, to get an update on the developers agreement, because by that point, the select board will likely have reviewed the developers agreement at a select board meeting. And so to get an update on where that is.
I guess so.
And then zoning revisions, we need to loop back with that, and make sure that that's buttoned up. And then March 6th is the night before the warrant closes, but at that point, I think it's, you know, are we voting for the zoning or not?
So the development agreement, no one's seen anything go by on that. Is there a draft?
There's a first draft that we received an outline form late last week. Neil has.
From the developer?
From the developer.
Okay.
What did I do?
Neil got forwarded the draft, but we need to go back and look at, I have a running list of things that the developer has agreed to, and need to make sure those are in. We also want the HAB agreements to be knitted in, so I'm having conversations with Roger and Virginia Bullock, our housing staff, to make sure those are in. And we also need Jonathan Simpson in town council's office to review it. Once he has, then we can start to share that with you guys. Because it is so integral to the zoning, you guys have got to see both.
Yeah, and quite honestly, that was a big problem with Hancock Village, is that the development agreement was not available or final until a minute before town meeting.
I agree, and I'm more than happy to post it as soon as there's a draft that has some
I went
consensus.
to the police station the weekend before town meeting to look at it.
Yeah, that was wild. We're not going there.
No, we're not doing it again, although it's starting to feel like it.
No,
We're 3 months away from town meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, we're getting Pam's analysis the day before the warrant closes. I mean, that's nuts. What if the information she gives us makes us really want to change something? What are we gonna do?
I agree.
I would state that Pam's actually reviewed this for the last 2 years, and what she's doing is looking back and making sure that the current market conditions make sense, and whether the additional co-working space that the committee has asked for is accounted for.
But if we decide that, say, her test of making the deck one floor and we get one less floor and we like that, then we've got to go back and change everything.
But that can be done even after the warrant closes, as long as you can make things, as long as you're within
Within the scope.
yeah. As long as you can go down, you can't go up.
We'll push it to the next town meeting, what's the rush? Do
Talk
it
to
right.
Bill about that.
So the,
We already opened the
The
hearing.
40B.
yeah, so
is
the next
rush.
40B meeting is on March 20th. So they're pacing this slow, but that will be the third meeting towards approving the 40B.
Well, there could be a mutual agreement to extend the
Absolutely.
180 days, so what's
It's,
the rush?
it's, we can fold up and do nothing. That's an option.
So,
We've been working on this for a couple of years though, so when you use the term rush, I think those of us who have been on the committee would
yeah, but some of the
necessarily-
problem with the Hancock Village thing was that if there were lots of holes and lots of things that were not right.
There's no
So-
comparison.
We're anticipating that there's gonna be holes, and there was stuff right before town meeting. We're talking about stuff that might be right before we file the warrant. Much different.
See what's happening, why decisions are being made.
Okay, let's adjourn.
Okay.